son. Hide him aboard.
Aye, aye, sir.
Fire, dress ship. Very good, sir. Dress ship.
A Brief History of Man's Maritime Mastery. Chapter 22. Of Floating Cities and Ghost Ships. April 23rd, 1838 was a day to remember in New York. Britain's little Sirius wheezed up to an anchorage off the battery. No sooner had her engines stopped than word spread that another steamship was plowing into the harbor, bellowing smoke. This was the Great Western, a behemoth of 1,320 tons. The city went wild. The Sirius, designed to run between England and Ireland, had been hastily chartered for this Atlantic voyage to beat the Great Western, the product of a rival company vying for a coveted mail contract. She had done well, 18 days from Cork, Ireland, with her paddle wheels driving her at an average of more than 6 knots, even against headwinds. She had even beaten an American packet ship. But the Great Western, starting later, crossed from Bristol in a remarkable 15 days. Built like a ship of the line, her hull reinforced with iron and wood diagonals, and sheathed with copper below the waterline, the Great Western was designed to smash her way through wind and sea, undeterred by the relentless thumping of her giant engines or the pounding of her great paddles. To keep her pressure steady in her 4 boilers, she consumed around 30 tons of coal a day, and her bunkers could hold 800 tons. Over her career, she would make 64 Atlantic crossings. With the Great Western, the era of ocean-going steamship had truly arrived. How glorious!" exclaimed an enthusiastic passenger. "This steamer wallops, gallops, and flounders along. 30 pounds for the ride, wines included. She goes like mad, puffing like a porpoise, breasting the waves like a seahorse, and at times skimming the surface like a bird." This passenger was aboard one of the most remarkable vessels of the age, a product of an eccentric genius, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, a man whose vision extended far beyond the shorelines. As an engineer of railroads, a bridge builder, and a dreamer of the impossible, Brunel had his gaze fixed on the sea. If he had been an American, the railroads might have absorbed all his energy. But in England, the tracks soon ran out of land, so Brunel turned his formidable intellect toward the ocean. From his drawing board emerged the Great Western. And then, in 1845, he followed up with the Great Britain, 322 feet long, the first large-screw propeller steamer, 322 feet long, the first large-screw propeller steamer, and the first iron-hulled ship to cross the Atlantic. The conservative critics gasped. Iron? It was contrary to nature. Vessels built of this would sink like stones. But shipbuilding wood was becoming scarce in England, and there were limits to the size you could make with a wooden hull. The Great Britain had 6 watertight compartments, 6 low masts, and engines producing about 1,000 horsepower, a term coined by James Watt himself. The power drove a 6-bladed, 15.5-foot propeller, giving her 11 knots on trials and an average of over 9 on her maiden voyage. She could carry some 360 passengers, with ample room for cargo. She was, in the words of her promoters, the most splendid experiment in shipbuilding ever submitted to a British public. And with good reason, for that iron hull proved nearly indestructible. The Great Britain ran ashore on the coast of Ireland and lay stranded for nearly a year, pounded by the gales. Yet she came off with hardly a scratch. She went on to serve for 30 years on the Australian run, became a 4-masted sailing ship, and survived a tempest off Cape Horn until 1937, when she finally ended up as a coal store in the Falkland Islands. But Brunel was not finished. His next ship would astonish the world, a ship so fantastic that it would make the world sit up and take notice. This was the Great Eastern, a leviathan of nearly 22,000 gross tons. She was so ahead of her time that it would take until 1899, with the launch of the liner Oceanic, to exceed her 693-foot length, and her tonnage would not be surpassed until 1904 by the White Star's Baltic. Brunel had a vision to make long voyages economical and speedy, using the power of steam. To do so, vessels had to be large enough to carry the coal they needed for the entire journey. He also wagered that vessels much larger than had been previously built could be navigated with great advantage, simply because of their size. No single means of propulsion could move the Great Eastern at any useful speed. She was initially designed to have 58-foot paddle wheels driven by 1,000 horsepower engines, a 24-foot propeller turned by a 1,600 horsepower engine, and 6 masts capable of spreading 6,500 square yards of sail. No pair of ordinary tugs could handle such a ship in harbor, so Brunel envisioned her also carrying her own 100-foot steam tugs. These, however, were never built. She could carry enough coal for a round trip from England to Ceylon at an average speed of 15 knots. She had room for 4,000 passengers, or 10,000 troops. But even before she touched water, the skeptics lined up. "She will never play as a ship," declared W.S. Lindsay, a prominent shipowner, to Brunel after inspecting her on the stocks at Millwall on the Thames. "But her hold could make magnificent saltwater baths, and her twin deck a superb hotel, with an elegant restaurant, smoking and dancing saloons." Brunel was not amused. The Great Eastern was so vast that she had to be launched sideways, as she was considered too big to go stern first into the river. November 3rd, 1857 was set as the big day. But as she inched her way down the launch rails, the ground beneath her gave way. Hydraulic rams failed, massive iron chains snapped, and Brunel tried again and again to inch her into the water. It took 3 long months, an extraordinarily high tide, and a massive effort before she finally floated. The monumental cost of launching, added to the fortune that had already gone into her 6 years of construction, broke Brunel financially and ruined his backers. A new company was formed to purchase the ship and get her to sea, which she finally did in September 1859. But on her trials, an explosion killed 5 men, and when Brunel heard the news, he collapsed. He died shortly after, leaving his masterpiece to an uncertain future. In the summer of 1860, the Great Eastern crossed to New York with only a handful of passengers to wander through her white and gilt Grand Saloon and stroll over her vast deck, named Oxford Street. America was fascinated by this giant, and crowds flocked aboard for tours, but the profits were meager. Ocean transport demand simply wasn't as big as the Great Eastern herself. On a voyage to New York in 1861, disaster struck yet again. A gale smashed her paddles and rudder and pitched 2 cows through a skylight into the ladies' saloon. With jury-rigged steering gear, she limped back to Queenstown, now Cobb, Ireland. It was another huge financial loss for her backers, but the Great Eastern somehow endured. Off Long Island, on another voyage, she ripped her outer hull on an uncharted rock, Great Eastern Rock, as it is now called. The damage was repaired with a cofferdam and riveting new plates. During the repairs, a mysterious tapping was heard from inside the dead space between her hulls. Legend had it that a shipwright had been sealed alive during her construction. Workers soon discovered that the hammering came from loose underwater tackle, and the ghost was forgotten. From 1865 to 1873, the Great Eastern found her purpose in laying transoceanic telegraph cables. Her vast holds could carry cables by the mile, and Oxford Street provided an excellent working area. But after completing the Bombay-Aden link of the London-Bombay cable, she dared not venture into the reef-strewn Red Sea. With no more cables to lay, she was left unemployed. True to the half-joking prophecy of W.S. Lindsay, she ended her days as a sideshow attraction. In 1889, in Liverpool, the tedious and costly process of breaking her up began. Deep inside her double hull, wreckers found the skeleton of a riveter. This was the ghost, who, as the old salty, superstitious sailors had said, had jinxed her for all 31 of her turbulent years. The dream of reliable, transatlantic cities on the water began with a small steamship named the Royal William. In 1833, she crossed the Atlantic from Canada to England, and not far behind her was a man with a grand vision, Samuel Cunard, a Nova Scotian entrepreneur eager to establish this transatlantic steamship service. With the help of a British subsidy, Cunard founded the Cunard Line, and by 1840 his dependable steam passenger vessels were traversing the North Atlantic, a service that continues to this day. Cunard's secret to success was a relentless focus on safety and reliability. The line's first vessel, the Britannia, set the pace at a steady 8.5 knots, day and night, in fair weather and foul. She even had seagoing cows to supply fresh milk, and passengers were informed that wine and spirit bar would be open daily as early as 6 a.m. But not all passengers were impressed. Charles Dickens, for one, found his stateroom to be an utterly impracticable, thoroughly hopeless, and profoundly preposterous box. Still, Cunard's fleet grew. By 1850, the Africa and the Asia joined the line, built with 2 thick skins of English oak and filled with rock salt to prevent dry rot. Soon the ships were built of iron, and Cunard became known for its superbly trained officers. Mark Twain even quipped, "The Cunard people would not take Noah himself until they had worked him up through all the lower grades and tried him for 10 years. While Cunard focused on safety, other companies pushed for speed. The Collins Line, an American competitor subsidized by the U.S. government, emerged as Cunard's only challenger. Edward K. Collins pursued Congress to support his steamers to counter Cunard's dominance. Ships like the Arctic, Baltic, Atlantic, and Pacific were built of live oak and pine and strengthened with iron bands. In 1851, the Baltic made the westward crossing from Liverpool to New York in just 9 days and 18 hours. The first mail ship to make the trip in under 10 days. This achievement was celebrated even by the British with this little ditty. A steamer of the Collins Line, a Yankee Doodle notion, has quickest cut the mighty brine across the Western Ocean. British agents no way slow her merits to discover, suggest we buy her just to tow the Cunard packets over. But while passengers flocked to the luxurious Collins liners, with their steam-heated cabins, bathrooms, smoking rooms, and barber shops, costs began to spiral out of control. As the lawmakers demanded more speed, the costs doubled, then tripled, catching the liners in a financial whirlpool. Misfortune compounded their woes. In September 1854, the Arctic, racing through the fog off Cape Race, Newfoundland, collided with the French steamer Vesta. Initially, the Arctic's men believed the Vesta was more damaged and went to help, but it turned out that the Arctic had been fatally gashed below the waterline. The sea poured in, extinguishing her fires, and she sank, losing about 300 lives, including the wife, son, and daughter of Edward Collins himself. Less than a year later, the Collins Line ship Pacific disappeared, likely after colliding with an iceberg. Despite these catastrophic losses, shareholders poured more capital into building bigger and better ships, and the passenger numbers continued to rise. But the British fought back. New Cunard liners, like the 400-foot Scotia, edged ahead of the Collins Line. By 1863, the Scotia was running from Queenstown to New York in just over 8 days. She was the last and best of the transatlantic paddle wheelers. Meanwhile, the Collins Line collapsed. Congress had withdrawn its subsidy, discouraged by the high costs and tragic losses. But the Cunard Line was not alone. Fast German liners, luxurious French liners with elegant dining under chandeliers, and Britain's own Inman Line all competed for transatlantic passengers. The Inman Line focused on the growing immigrant traffic to America, offering improved conditions over the bare shelves and primitive bunks that had characterized steerage in the past. By the 1860s, Cunard had gained a reputation as the transatlantic ferry. In 35 years of service, they had not lost a single passenger or piece of mail, a simply remarkable achievement. The costly failure of the Collins Line discouraged further large-scale American competition. The Civil War also put a lid on new ventures for a time. Meanwhile, there was still plenty of work for steamships on America's inland waterways. As the Clermont had done on the Hudson River, the great gaudy paddle wheelers now thrived on the Mississippi, showcasing steam power's continuing appeal in a rapidly growing nation. So, from the early days of steam on the Hudson to the mighty transatlantic liners that crisscrossed the ocean, steamships changed the world. They shrank distances, linked continents, and opened new opportunities for trade, travel, and communication. Visionaries like Samuel Cunard, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, and Edward K. Collins dared to dream big. And while not all of their dreams came true, and some met tragic fates, they all left a legacy that shaped the course of maritime history.